tonight, I want to do something a little bit differently. I normally say that on Sunday nights. I try to do a little bit of something that at least I am not accustomed to doing. And tonight, I want to look through the entirety of the Bible. Don't run out. It won't take that long. Not funny. I'm sorry. I'm not on today. But I want to look at this idea. This is something that you might have heard before, a thread running all the way through the Bible. And this thread that runs all the way through the Bible gives us the very reason that we have the Bible, the very reason that God basically did anything that he did for us is told by watching this thread run through the Bible. But I have puzzle pieces up here representing my 2 points because of how we tend to view the Bible. It would help if I turned it on. Maybe. Can we get to the next slide, please? It's always on Sunday night when this happens to me. We tend to view the Bible in a very different way than we do most books. Most books we see as an entirety of the narrative, a whole narrative going on. But the Bible, for some reason, we view a lot differently. We tend to take a view of it of one book at a time. We look very, very closely and very in-depth at one book, but we don't look at the bigger picture of how those books fit together. Any luck? We don't look at how those books fit together. So when you look at it in other terms, you may be thinking of looking at it through a microscope. You look at a chapter at a time, a verse at a time, this section at a time. And that's a good way to look at it, but what we don't do is look at it through a telescope. We don't look at the bigger picture. We don't look at the greater theme of it all. Here we go. So we tend to look at the picture like this, very up close. We'll kind of go back over this. Very up close, but you zoom out, and there's so much more for you to see. All of these things, you can look at all of these little parts and pieces separate, but they all go together to make something bigger. And in case you're wondering, there's Waldo. So we tend to look at each piece isolated, and rarely do we view the entire puzzle being put together. Because in a way, the Bible is somewhat of a puzzle. We tend to look at one piece, and then we put it back down into the puzzle. And then we pick up another piece, and we look in-depthly at that piece. But all of these pieces run together. And it's like you're looking at a microscope instead of a telescope. So what I want to do tonight is kind of look at it in terms of the completed puzzle. Ephesians 1:4, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. The key word there, before the foundation of the world. God knew his plan before the foundation of the world. So, his plan started all the way in Genesis 1:1 and runs all the way through. So, that's what I want to do tonight, is to look at this plan. And we're going to be adding to this the whole time, just so hopefully you can get some kind of I do better when I can see things like this in graphs and charts. And I know people learn in different ways. Maybe this will help you to see things, maybe just sitting down and studying. And I have actually a spreadsheet of this. If anybody wants it, I have this a lot more fleshed out. But with everything, we'll have the verse, we'll have the year. And this is something that I learned a lot later in life than I should have learned it. But when you're talking about BC, it goes in reverse. It starts at the highest number and goes to 0, and then once you get into AD, it starts at 0 and goes higher. So you'll have the starting year, and then the bottom year there is how long it is from creation. So Genesis 3:15 is where we're going to start. And it is, we don't know this for certain, but we're going to say 0 years from creation and around 4,225 BC. That is not an exact number. I do not claim to know the exact number. I want to make that clear that I'm not giving you exacts and perfect numbers here. But Genesis 3:15 is one of the most important verses that we see in the Bible. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The significance of this verse is it is the first time that we see a prophecy about Jesus. You see this idea between you and the woman, enmity, anger, animosity, between you being the devil. God is talking to Satan here. And the woman being Eve, the only woman that is around at this time. So between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Her seed is the first mention that we see of Jesus. And he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And the significance of that is fairly simple. It's just a head injury is a much, much bigger deal than a heel injury. You hurt your heel, and you're going to end up being okay. But if you hurt your head significantly, you're pretty much done for. And that is the idea behind this. This is the first time that we see God's plan put into play, where he says, I will put forth my son, and he will injure your head. He will do away with you, and you will do very little to him. And in that, he means the crucifixion. But you see that, and that is the first promise that we see. And then we go on to see the promise that God made to Abraham. And there's a big jump here. But you see in Genesis 12, where he makes this promise, 1 through 3, he tells him to get out of your country, away from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And you see the several different promises that he makes to Abraham here, that you're going to have a land, you're going to have a people, and the world will be blessed through you. And we see this, and we see this is how God is going to fulfill this prophecy that he made in Genesis 3:15. We see that through Abraham, that is how he is going to bring about Jesus. So you go on here, and you see from Abraham where he has a son, Isaac. Isaac has his son, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And of course, there's all these stories in here, but we're focusing on trying to get through this and see all that encompasses this thread that runs through the Bible. So we see Isaac and Jacob, and we get to Jacob's 12 sons, and we know about Joseph. That is the biggest story that we have from his 12 sons. We pick up with him in Genesis 37. This is around, again, this is not the exact date, but 1987 BC, and that's about 2,233 years from creation. And again, like I said this morning, I've learned to not take advantage of the fact that people know stories very well, but this is a fairly well-known story of where Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. He rose through Egypt and became a great power in this country. And eventually he is reunited with his family. He forgives them, and his family resides in Egypt. So through Abraham, it gets to Isaac. It gets from Isaac to Jacob. And through him and his sons, Abraham's promise of a people comes through. Through these 12 people becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel, and that is how it grows into this vast number. And I think this is where you get the first two puzzle pieces being put together. Because when I was growing up, one of the things I never really thought about was the fact that how did so many Jews end up in Egypt? How, they were enslaved there. Why were they there in the first place? Why did they end up in captivity there? And this is the answer. It started with Joseph and his brothers. They multiplied and multiplied and multiplied until the leader of Egypt became scared because there was such a massive number of them, and he enslaved them. And you see the first time that these puzzle pieces start to go together when you get to Exodus. And then in Exodus 1, it starts really the true organization of the Jewish people. And again, it's this fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham after God had made it clear that he would send his son. In a fashion, he gave a way that this problem that we face, sin, would be stomped out. So they receive a leader in Moses. They receive a law with the 10 Commandments and the hundreds and hundreds of law that would follow them. and then they received a tradition. And, it's a very rich and full tradition that you have through the Jewish people, and they really become their own people through this. And they almost get to have this land that is also promised. And I say almost because, again, a very well-known story of Moses sending the spies and 2 coming back positive and the rest coming back negative and saying, we can't take this. And because of that, the people were not able to enter into the land until Joshua. And you have the story that we talked about this morning where they go in and they take down the walls of Jericho. But this is where that promise of Israel receiving a land comes into play. And it's around 1407 BC. And again, that might not mean anything to you. I know I love history. That was always my favorite subject in school. But anytime a teacher said a number, it went right over my head. I didn't get the number part of it. I got the organization of when it happened in place of other things. So maybe numbers do mean something to you. But you see here through Joshua and Judges, the Jewish nation takes over Canaan and begins to settle it. And Abraham's promise is almost complete. And at this point, Joshua passes away and Judges rule over the people. So the land has been fulfilled, the great people have been fulfilled, and then you get to where every nation will be blessed because of him. That part is still to come. But once you get through the Judges, the people of Israel get kind of fed up with the Judges. They want kings. They want to be like all the other nations. So God says, all right, you want a king? Here's your kings. And you go through your Saul, your David, your Solomon, and then you reach probably, in my opinion, as far as the narrative of the Bible goes, one of the most complicated parts, one of the most confusing parts when you're looking at the narrative that is the Bible, and that's being what we're talking about tonight. You get to the split of the people of Israel. After Solomon, you have a very confusing time where you have Judah and you have Israel, and one is following God, one is not, and you go through this king for this kingdom, this king for this kingdom, and another king for another kingdom, and you have to be very, very attentive when you're reading through this to see what's actually going on in which kingdom. But all that being said, for simplicity reasons, we'll try to skip over that a little bit until you get to 2 Kings 25:1. This part is very important, and we have a little better idea of the exact year that we see here because of secular history, because some of the documents that we have there, 538 BC, so about 3,687 years from the point of creation, we see where both of the split nations of Israel are brought into captivity. And we'll get into why that is significant later on. But from there, you have Ezra and Nehemiah, where these men are allowed to go back to their homeland, rebuild the temple, and rebuild the wall. And we don't have time to really flesh out those stories or all the stories that we have gone through because we'd be here all night. It's a very thick book, but go back and study these in more detail. But the reason that it is so important that they fall into captivity at this point is because after Ezra and Nehemiah, you have 400 years of silence. And I don't mean just silence of the Bible, I mean silence from God. Up until this point, they have had conversations with God. They have had direct contact with God through prophets, through judges, through the leaders, directly to men. And it's interesting to see how God does his communicating throughout the Bible and see who he goes through. But up until this point, they had some type of communication with God. But right there, I've heard people talk about the blank page in between the New Testament and the Old Testament being 400 years in that one page. Because 400 years, God remains silent. They are in captivity. And this is where we find ourselves when Jesus comes on the scene. This is where we find ourselves when the New Testament starts. So everything in this follows the Jewish nation. Once the Jewish nation is formed, the entire Old Testament follows it. That's what it's about. That's why when you look at religious Jews, that's the only thing that they worry about is the Old Testament. They don't worry about the New Testament because it was written for Jews. The reason it was written for Jews is because they are the people of Abraham. And the reason why that matters is because Abraham is who God said that he would fulfill this promise of Genesis 3:15. And Genesis 3:15 is how God said he would fix this problem that we have in our lives called sin. So it's interesting that you can put a pin in Genesis 3:15 and trace it all the way through the Bible, finding this person, that person, this person, that person, this, all the way to the cross. God runs a thread all the way through. And when you see all of it working together, you see the purpose for all of this, the Bible starts to make so much more sense to you. It starts to be more meaningful because you see the genius that it took to create this writing. And not only that, what's so interesting is even past the cross, everything is still focused on one simple thing: fixing the problem that we have, that is sin. So everything goes back to Genesis 3:15, and you see how everything flows so perfectly together, and you see the brilliance of God, of how he made it all work. I taught a class on all of this, going through all of it. It was a very long class, but I ended up with this chart, and it really helped me to see how the Bible worked, to see this puzzle put together completely. These are the books that we covered tonight: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Those are the books that you can look at and say, these are the clear narrative that the Bible runs through. So if you were going to make a storybook on the Bible, take out all the poetry, all the prophecies, and just have the story that is the Bible, these are really the books that you would see. So then you add on books that took place during these. You see Job took place more or less in Genesis. It's believed by a lot of people that that Job is the oldest book. It was the first book that was ever written in the Bible. You have Leviticus that was written during Exodus, Deuteronomy that was written during Numbers, Ruth that took place during the time of Judges, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which are very interesting books, kind of recapping what you see in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and kind of a different perspective. And Esther that takes place during Ezra and Nehemiah. And those are kind of your narratives within the narrative, kind of your side stories, your B-plot. But you also have where the prophets fit in. And you can see here, I can't tell how these colors are going to turn out on the screen until they're up there. But you see how the colors, or how the prophets fit in. Most of them were written during 1st and 2nd Kings. You have a couple on either side of that. And then finally you have poetry, which most of them were written 1st and 2nd Samuel. And again, I have a paper copy of this. If you would like a copy of it or a copy of the years, I can copy that off and get it to you, because I know it helped me so much to be able to sit down and really look at these things. But I talked a lot this morning about how there are a lot of things that we're told to do as Christians that are incredibly difficult, and God did not say them to say, if you can take care of these things, if you can get these things done, that's great. He said, this is what I expect you to do, and he expects it done. You don't have coaches that say you need to do things this way, and if you don't do it, that's okay. It's not that big a deal. They want you to do it that way, and it's the same way with God. He wants us to do these things, and what he has told us to do is to tear that book apart, to understand his word. He tells us that everything that was written in it was written for reproof, for reproach, for doctrine. We should know the Bible inside and out. So to be able to understand how it all fits together, that's important for us as Christians. And I think that's something that a lot of times we overlook, because it is great I love seeing some of these people. I'm not great at it, but I love to see people when they can take one or two scriptures and just absolutely dissect it, tell you everything about it, and spend 20 minutes on 6 words. That's incredible to me, and that's a great thing to do. But every once in a while, I think we need to take a step back and understand the bigger picture that is the Bible, the bigger genius that it took to put all of this together. Because, when you look at the little bits and pieces, people can try to pick those apart and find where, I don't think this adds up with this, and try to find discrepancies in the Bible. They'll have a hard time doing it because there aren't any. But when you step back and look at it as a whole, the time span that it took to write all of it and how everything fits together seamlessly, it's impossible to not believe in God. So it's kind of, I say a lot of times I try to preach more motivational things in the Sunday morning, and Sunday night maybe a little bit more educational. I hope this was educational. I know that a lot of times I get to talking about things like this, and I might just drone on and my voice just becomes monologue, but this is something that is greatly important. If you do not understand how the Bible fits together, it's something that you need to sit down and learn. It's something that we all need to know. And the hardest part for me on lessons like this is the invitation, because I don't always know how to lead from very thick information into if you need anything. But I hope that you all know that every time we come together, we are here with open arms. We really want to be here for anybody that needs it. We love you and we want to be here to help you. And if you have the need to wash your sins away in baptism, you've seen today how everything that God has done from Genesis 3:15 on is for us to have salvation from our sins. And if you'd like to take advantage of that, then we're here now. We ask that you come as we stand and sing.